Hey there, it's Snek, and I'm back with Chapter 2 of our Buildfile tutorial. We're going to be working with CSVs today. I'm going to cover the basics, not necessarily how we want to edit, say, items or classes or make 7-move troubadours. No, I'm just going to talk about what CSVs are themselves, and I'm going to talk about how we make specific edits later. But today I will be using a real example. I'm going to be using the item table and the spell association table today, and we're going to make a few test edits to those. Um, Recap from last week, we went over everything about text editing, a little less dialogue than would have been complete, but that's more for later. We changed some item names because that's an easy thing to test, but today we're going to change some item stats. And while we were editing data in ROM that was text itself, why don't instead we edit the reference of the text, make it reference something else? We can edit the data of the item. This is stuff that should be pretty straightforward, but how we get to that end can be a little tricky to set up. So I'm going to help out with that. Um, yeah, we're going to introduce some new tools. We've got another batch file. As you should recognize from text editing, we had assembleText.bat. Now we have assembleTables.bat. That should be pretty straightforward. We have a new executable. Like, remember we had text process. This is a custom executable that I've written that I'll be releasing at the time of the release of this video. That's similar to C to EA, if you're familiar with that. That's an older script by Circles Everywhere that would assemble CSV files. But I've made a few modifications. I've started from scratch and made my own version that should be more versatile and more stable, and for some reason runs a lot faster. But I've thought about this, and I'm just going to use TableManager, and maybe later I'll make a video about C to EA, but for now this is fine. And since we're editing CSVs, we're going to need something like Microsoft Excel, which I'm going to be using because I get it through my university. But I know there are other free CSV editors. Anything that can edit a spreadsheet, like Excel, should work. A CSV itself, CSV stands for comma separated values, and basically it's just a spreadsheet. And here, I've already got the item table stuck in here in preparation, and I've got it pulled up as well. This is what it looks like in Excel, but just to show you what a CSV really is, we can open this in Notepad++, and it's just a text file. It's literally just cells separated by columns and new lines. So that's really all it is. Whereas if you try to open a .xlsx, or yeah, whatever, Excel's native format, it's all a garbled mess. It's not meant to be read like that. So whenever you save spreadsheets, we call them CSVs. Never forget to make them CSVs. You have to save as CSVs if you're making a new file. So as you can see, I've filled in this left column with event assembler definitions for what item is what. And we can see every item has a name, a description. This is just the item ID again, which is useful for functions. We have different weapon abilities. We have effectiveness, and then these core stats, min-max range. All this stuff we can edit. So whenever we make an edit to a table, like before with text, we would assemble tables. So pretty much with CSVs, like, text is a little nitpicky with how we format it, and this text ID is this, and we want this text here. But with TableManager, we just kind of say, I have all of this data. I say this is the item name, description, etc. But how does it interpret that? how does it know where to format everything in the ROM? And how it knows, it takes a file called a nightmare module. If you've been around for a while or you've talked to the boomers, then you've heard the term nightmare before. And it's not very, it's kind of looked down upon now. Nightmare was software that was used long, long ago, back in the dark ages before FE Builder or build files, and it's basically a hex editor. It's a glorified hex editor. There would be drop downs. It would say, here are all the data that we see in the ROM, and you would be able to edit each value while seeing what it is. I don't think it deserves any hate. It did exactly what it did before, or what it was supposed to, but it's kind of an archaic method now that we have CSVs and FE Builder and all of that jazz. But something that why we still use the nightmare modules nowadays is because it's still an effective way of linking what data names we have in our CSV, how big the data is supposed to be, where it's supposed to go in each table, and what table it belongs to. So there's never really been a reason to phase out using the nightmare modules themselves, but that's just where they come from and why we still use them. So we see here, this isn't something that C to EA does, but something that TableManager does is it links these column names with an exact match to the string, and it finds, oh, item name. This is the first field at, x equals plus 0 in the item table for each entry. It's 2 bytes long. It's a short, which makes sense because the text ID is a short. And then these two fields are not really relevant. That's something that Nightmare used, and we don't need those for CSV. If you're curious about what is what inside the Nightmare module, I threw in this note, which I took from my old Nightmare file. It's just doc on the format of the Nightmare module. You really only need to understand it if you're going to make a custom Nightmare module for some custom data. We see at the top here we have a header, we have comments, this is just some arbitrary name. This is the vanilla offset of the table. This is how many entries there are in vanilla data. This is the size of every entry. And then again, these are both just stuff that Nightmare would use. And we can have an arbitrary number of fields. You can see, oh, maybe it's another table where I saw they were out of order, but they can be out of order for TableManager. They can, yeah, they can't overlap. So if this was a short, then this would overlap with 30 here. That wouldn't even work anyway because that wouldn't be aligned. Event Assembler would yell at you. But yeah, I took this Nightmare module from the skill system, and I've taken this CSV also from the skill system and edited this column and this column to match Event Assembler definitions. And I did that because TableManager behaves a little different from C to EA. And I'm sorry, I keep referring to C to EA if you're new to build files. It's just another CSV converter. But actually, why don't I just try assembling this right now? It should work. Yeah, just like before, we run assemble tables whenever we make a change to our tables. And we see that .event files are created. Oh, well, this looks terrible. But that's okay, because what's inside this file is not really important to us. It's just a format that Event Assembler can read. We don't edit these, we edit the CSVs. But yeah, I don't know why I just closed that. It's kind of like when we assembled text, it converted it to a format that Event Assembler could read. Even though it looked ugly, it doesn't matter. We don't really ever look at it. So I hope you've seen the prologue. That's the basics to Event Assembler. But let's see what this is doing here. We align 4. We have a label to the item table. Okay, so this is something I probably didn't mention, and this is something that is new to Event Assembler. This fill command just writes zeros to however much data you specify here. So the maximum number of entries times the size of each entry. This basically initializes the entire table to be 0 before we start actually writing our meat and potatoes to the data, or to the table. So then we go line by line through the CSV, iron sword, slim sword, etc., all the way down. For every entry, we write to the item table plus this EA definition, which I'll talk about in a second, times the length of the table, which this reads from the Nightmare module. And then it takes every field from the Nightmare module, and it takes every cell in the row, and it figures out how do I want to put the data exactly in the ROM. And I've designed it to be modular in this way so that if I wanted, for whatever reason, item name and item description to be somewhere else in the CSV, I could put it all the way over here for all I care. I could still assemble tables. And everything would still be the same. It still understands where I want to put this. So, and again, that's something C2EA didn't quite do. But we should notice that we're expecting to write this to free space, right? So where is this included? Well, look at this. Do you remember with text process how a master installer file would be auto-generated that would include every single text ID that we wanted to write to the ROM? TableManager does the same thing. We see these different tables that are referenced, and it writes them. Don't worry about these for now. I'll get to those in a second. But for now, what's relevant is we're including our item table. But then this means we have to include this file, just like we did with the master text installer. So I have another file here that's including our table installer. So we're including our auto-generated CSV output. And then if we want this file to be applied, we have to include dataInstaller.event, which I do in our master build file right here. Let me reorder these for a second. So let's recap. We have our master build file, which is passed to Event Assembler by makehack. This includes our data installer, and I've created this file instead of just including our auto-generated table installer from here. I've created this file as a master kind of data installer file, and there's going to be different kinds of data which we'll include later that aren't managed by CSVs. So this is just for later. And then this file includes our table installer, which is auto-generated by TableManager, and that makes sure that every CSV that you want to be included is included. So that's how that hierarchy works. We see that this is being written to free space, right? Just like our text is being written to free space. If this all is being written to free space, then all of our tables are being written to free space, which is kind of a problem at the moment. I actually didn't mean to do that. But this is a decent segue to this table options file. This is a file that's also not a feature of C2EA, but this is how TableManager reads each CSV, and you can pass it options like, do I want this to be written to free space or not? So if I say false here, and I rerun my tables, we should see a change here in that this reads the intended vanilla offset from the item table .nmm, and we see this is writing to free space. So again, this with item usability and effects, don't worry about this right now, but we can write inline. Inline means write to free space or don't write to free space. So here, I'm going to write these in this note file. So quick review, TableManager is our CSV converter. It takes a CSV and turns into a .event file. Alright, this file isn't included by Event Assembler or anything. This is used exclusively by TableManager. So our options that we can have are, well, CSV declares okay. So each CSV command here will open a new CSV and parse, well, that CSV, this file path that you give it. So we have in items, item table.csv. I have the spell association table here, which I'm going to include as an example later, once I do some tests and finish this up. I'm sorry if I make a spelling mistake. I probably will. I'm terrible at spelling. Column? No, it's one L, isn't it? That looks wrong. Column? Column? It's fine. I'm sorry. You can have an arbitrary number of these. So we see in this CSV, we're taking data from, what, 5 different Nightmare modules? And again, these other 4 Nightmare modules are a little more complex, but this is another feature of TableManager in that you can draw data from as many Nightmare modules as you like, and it will try to match each column header name string with a field in any number of those, or in any one of those Nightmare modules. And it also uses those Nightmare modules to determine what data goes where. So I may as well talk about this now. These are other properties of items that we see here. The item usability, effect, prep screen usability, target pointer. These are all used by like stat boosters and vulnerary elixir, weird items that are often hard-coded like that. We don't have any data here for these kind of early ID items because they're all down here. If a cell is blank, then TableManager will try not to write the data and let fill write a 0 there, and that's done for reasons for not writing backwards on a switch statement. Don't worry about that. We see these here. These are all different usability target functions, but the point is, if you don't really understand that, that's okay, because this data doesn't go in the item table. And that's kind of a profound thing because until now there wasn't a way to write data to a not item table in the item table CSV, at least not in a way that was sane. So we see there's no reference to any of the usability effect pointers here because they're in different places. So for the item effect, for example, we say in table options, for this CSV, I also want you to refer to the item effect table.nmm. So we go here. Well, this is simple. Item effect pointer. When it's looking for how to handle this column here, sees, item effect pointer, it's in this nightmare module, it's a member of this table. And so then it knows, from there, we can write it in here. So that's pretty much how that works. Here it is. Notepad++, please. It's good software, I swear. Right, I mentioned inline. All right. Write sequentially is something that we're going to use later. This is important for list formats, which I'll cover in a second, and it's also in case you want to mimic C to EA behavior. So I'll talk about the index of a table. The index of something is really simply just what number it is in some table or list or of something. So iron sword is index 1, slim sword is index 2, steel sword is index 3. Maybe in math you've covered something with sums and you have an index counter. It's that simple. Like item ID is just its index in the table. But although these are ordered in by index because that's how I found them in the skill system build file, I can order these in any way I want because if we take a quick look at our generated item table, we see that we write to the item table plus whatever the index of the iron sword is times its entry size. So if iron sword is index 1 and we multiply it by 36, we're writing to the second index in the item table. But remember that anything in computer science, an array or some table or list always starts at 0. So although iron sword is index 1, index 0 is the first item in the item table, so index 1 is really the second. But that's not really something you need to worry about. But yeah, if I say switch iron sword and steel sword, I'm just going to stick this down here for a second so I can move steel sword, or else slim sword, it doesn't matter, where iron sword was, and I move this back, and I rerun tables. Sure, these two rows got switched, but that doesn't change anything about what the item indices are. So in the end, they're going to be written in the same way. Iron sword is still index 1 and is going to get written to the second index in the item table. Slim sword is index 3, and it's going to get written to the third. And this is a testament to the power of EA definitions because I don't need to worry about what the index is. We'll see later this is really useful for creating custom items. So I can just forget about what exactly the index is, and I can just say I want iron sword to be written to whatever its index is in its item table. Let me just reset these because that'll bother me if I don't. I think about it, kind of defeats the purpose, but whatever. So write sequentially basically means ignore the left-hand column. Just write each of these in order going down. That's what C to EA does. So if I turn off write sequentially, or turn on write sequentially, sorry, we'll see it stops writing to whatever the definitions index is. It just writes all the data. This sets the maximum number of entries for a table. You're almost always going to want this to be 256 or 255. It doesn't really, it doesn't really matter what you set this to unless like you're writing to a table that's larger than a byte in index, or you want to be conservative of space and you only need, I don't know, 10 indices or whatever. There are a few other options. By the way, I have the source for TableManager here in case you want to look at it. I'm not saying I'm good at Python, so if you want to roast me on my source, then feel free. But if you want more technical or more complete definitions for what everything does in table options, I'll stick this here for ease. Indexes, I don't care. I looked it up and apparently that's proper, and I don't want to misspell indices because I suck at spelling. And what was the last one? Right, max entries. All right, hopefully that's legible and simultaneously complete. Here we go. So we see that we can successfully write a table, namely the item table, and really 5 tables at the same time if we count the usability and effect pointers, but we won't worry about those now. Why don't we actually test changing something? So remember, for now, we just want to overwrite the vanilla item table. This is why I have exactly the number of entries that we should have for the vanilla table. I didn't add anything on. I don't think I included anything from Avenir. But if anyone spots a mistake or anything that's wacky in this, don't hesitate to let me know. And that goes for TableManager too. Like, I've just been testing it on my own. And if you get any weird errors or some behavior that shouldn't be right, don't hesitate to contact me. DM me on Discord. It's fine. I try to be friendly. I don't bite. But just to make sure we have all of this down, did I? Yeah, we're not writing sequentially. And I'm just going to run makehack. I also added this. This is a common thing that people like to have. Makehack full. I know the skill system has makehack quick and makehack full. Makehack quick only runs event assembler. That's just what we've been using. I haven't changed this. Makehack full runs everything that needs to be assembled before you call event assembler. So in our case, it's just it assembles text and it assembles table, which is useful if you don't remember what you've assembled, or you just want to be complete, or you've changed a bunch of stuff and it's not worth running each script individually. If you're like me, you have a slow computer and running all of these at once takes a really long time, so I only run what I need to, but just for convenience and for preference, if you like it, you can run make hack full. I'll run it now, it should work. But we see it's unnecessary to assemble text. We've already assembled tables, but for a build file this small, the time may as well be negligible, but when you get a big build file, it all really adds up. But here we go, our edited ROM. We have no errors. I don't know if there's audio coming through, but it doesn't matter. So we see I've overwritten the item table. We'll confirm that in a second, and I don't think anything is broken. Remember Slim Blade. This was our meme joke that we made in text editing. But yeah, everything should be working fine. Ouch. But let's say we want to make an edit to Erica's rapier. She needs a buff, right? Let's give her 30 crit. That seems fair and balanced. Remember this won't work. I just made a mistake. This doesn't assemble tables, this only calls event assembler. So I can run make hack full if I want. It'll unnecessarily assemble text, but that's okay for now. Alternatively, I could just go into tables and run my table assembler. And here we go. Erica's rapier now has 30 crit, and we see, yeah, there we go. I mean, we can change just about anything we want in this table, and the change would be applied. I don't think, for the sake of time, I don't think that changing anything else for show is necessary, but you can play around with it if you want as much as you like. What I think will be more useful is me showing you how to implement another table. I guess it also begs the question, where did I get all of this data? I just stole this from the skill system, but if you want to rip vanilla data from the ROM, there's a circles tool that's the sister to C2EA. That's called N to C. That's N letter 2 and then the C, just the letter, .exe. It's on FE Universe. It should be pretty straightforward how to use, so I won't cover it, but if for whatever reason you need to rip vanilla data, that's how you do it. That's how these skill system tables were ripped. Also, if you ever want to see how I implement a specific table, you're welcome to see my Legends of Avenir GitHub. But again, I took this spell association table straight from the skill system. And we see that this is a little different. First of all, iron sword, iron blade, steel sword, silver sword. It isn't in order, which is kind of weird, but we have data just like the item table. It's different data, but this is weird because this is a list format. And I'm going to make an important distinction between a table structure and a list structure. A table structure is when the game decides, I want to know this attribute of the item. Well, let's say I want to know its might for damage calculations. And it says, I know the item ID, so how do I find the might? Well, it can call a function, but essentially what it does is it knows the offset of the item table, it knows how big an entry is, so it can take the item ID, it can multiply it by the table size and add it to the offset of the beginning of the table. That's what I do, or we do, or whoever does, when we want to write to a table. That's because it's indexed. That's why it works. It's because this ID is guaranteed to have data at this index in the item table. A list, however, in practice is handled a little differently. The spell association table in the game, it's basically it links spell animations to spells, basically, and staves, and it does a few other things like the color to apply to the enemy, and I don't know, like it's weird staff stuff too. But when the game wants to know what spell animation do I play for, I don't know, fire or hellfire, thunder, or whatever, it takes the item ID, but that data isn't in the item table. Why IS decided to code it that way is, I don't know, it's irrelevant. They made a decision, they coded it this way for some reason. But it's a list, so instead, in the code for getting the spell animation, it takes the offset of the start of the list and it checks, is this index hellfire? No. Reiterate. Is this index hellfire? No. Reiterate. Is this index hellfire? And it loops through every index in the list until it finds hellfire. There we go. Hellfire. And it checks, this is hellfire. So we see hex 17 is the spell animation. We found it. So this is not indexed. If it tried to treat this as a table and jump to hellfire's index as... If it tried to jump to hellfire's index, chances are it wouldn't be hellfire and it would get the wrong data. I say this because A, it's important to know the difference between a list structure and a table structure. B, later we're going to implement some data as lists in Event Assembler and some as tables in Event Assembler. And C, it's important to know as a decision, how do I want to implement this data in my build file? If this is an index table, it's probably best to use a CSV because it's nice, it's ordered, we have rows, you can compare between different CSVs, and you can combine data from what would be multiple game tables into a single CSV that's indexed together with TableManager. That's why I'm allowed to set the set these two tables, these 5 tables together. Usability, pointer, prep screen usability. All of this stuff is able to be indexed together, so I can fit it all into one CSV. But I can't do that with the spell association table, not just because it's indexed differently, it's not indexed at all. It's a list. But we also have to consider with a list, what if the item we're looking for isn't in the list? IS is weird, and they implemented every single item in the list regardless of whether it has a spell animation or not. Whatever. It's a weird example, but just about every list should have a terminator. And this is something that we need to detect when we're doing research or when we want to rip data from vanilla. This is the terminator for the spell association table. And it's just, I mean, this is something you don't need a table because if you have an item ID, you're guaranteed to find data because you just jump to it in the item table. You're not guaranteed to find data in a list unless you have the weird example of every single case is going to be implemented in the list. And even so, that's bad practice, I think. But yeah, list format, find a terminator. So I'm going to implement the spell association table with table options. I'm going to declare a new CSV. I'm going to tell Notepad++ to shut up. There we go. It's still doing the thing where it's not reading my words. It's not reading my syntax file correctly. I'm going to pass it the file path to the spell association table. All right. This CSV only contains data from one vanilla table. I'm going to call my label the spell association table. Its nightmare module associated with it is aptly named spell association table.nmm, right? Did I not pull that? Oh, geez. All right. I didn't even get the directory right. All right. I'm going to go grab the nightmare module from the skill system. It's right here in tables, item editors. Let's see. Spell association editor. Oh, no, I did grab it. I just never renamed it. Spell association table. All right. I am going to not write this to free space for now. I do want to write this sequentially because I don't want TableManager to try to index this. And max entries, I don't need that for writing sequentially. Let's take a look at the nightmare module. I'm going to double check that every field exactly matches in the string. And if it doesn't, then I think TableManager should either yell at me or we'll be missing data. Either way, I should notice. Yeah, this all looks okay. Oh, this field is missing. So we can just edit this. This is at, what, 15? Yeah. That's within the scope of each entry. So this should work. Yes, no errors. Here we go. We're writing to its vanilla offset. I didn't mention this, but notice the push org. This is because this is within writing to a free space block, so we want to make sure that we don't disturb that. We're writing to the vanilla offset right now. And this looks okay. All right. And, boy, I'm not going to make Erica a mage or whatever just to test this for now, but maybe next time when I have a video that's, oh no. 166. What's going on here? Come again? I shouldn't have closed that. Oh, that's because, this is irregular. This shouldn't be the way it is. That's kind of a weird way to write that. But this is the kind of thing that shouldn't exist. You shouldn't have multiple pieces of data like this inside a single cell. This is just what I grabbed from the skill system, so I'm going to figure that this is okay. I figure we'll find out if that isn't okay, and then... Oh, I didn't reassemble. Hope you don't crash. I don't think it will. We should be fine. Yeah, I changed back Rapier's crit to 10. And yeah, everything seems okay. So we'll make edits to this that are more meaningful whenever we cover item data. But this is just showing as an example how I'm going to implement another table. So we can just leave that alone for now. I don't think there was much else I want to cover except for something else. Let me read over this real quick. Yeah, this real quick. Vanilla data isn't all we're necessarily concerned with in a CSV. A lot of times, like especially in the skill system, hack creators like to write their data in CSV format, which is perfectly okay. I do this a lot. Like if you use the strength magic split, you'll see that magic data they're written in their own CSVs. One of the benefits of TableManager is that we can combine this with our class and character tables because they're indexed together. But the point is, they're completely written to free space and the data doesn't exist in vanilla. But that's okay. We can just always write inline and yeah, everything goes swimmingly. Yeah, and otherwise, the last thing I want to cover is repointing. So I mentioned before this weird inline parameter. And I use the word inline because this carries over from C to EA. The way that you would tell C to EA whether you wanted to write in free space or not would be in the top left cell of your spreadsheet. You would write inline whatever you want the label to be, and it would just write it to free space. There was one version that would try to automatically repoint for you. There was another that wouldn't, that I preferred because I like to do my repointing manually. TableManager doesn't have a manual or an automatic repointing feature, but it does follow inline. So if I say inline true, this is the setting I had when I accidentally set this to repoint earlier. We'll see we can revert to this. Oh, CSV. Nothing changed in the CSV because that's not what assemble tables does. Did I close this? Yeah. We'll see we're no longer orging to the vanilla offset. We're filling. I mentioned before this just writes zeros for however long you declare it to. So the reason this works is we fill the entire item table to be 0, and then whatever comes after the item table we'll start writing after all the zeros, but before whatever writes next, we want to push and pop at the end of this. Every entry, we jump to that item table's location, write that entry, and then next entry, next entry, next entry, until we're done, and we jump to the end of the item table, and then our current org is set up for whatever comes after. Nothing writes to vanilla. This is all included in free space, and our item table label is visible for anything to reference. But how do we tell our vanilla functions, how does the ROM know where we've put the new item table in free space? So I'm going to show what happens when you don't repoint. Let's give our friendly Erica an overpowered rapier. Actually, this isn't going to do what I wanted it to because I forgot to do something. I've been secretly including this. Don't worry about that yet. Here we go. So what the hell happened? 10 crit? 30 crit? There's some discrepancy here. And this is the problem. we can write our new item table to free space as much as we like, but we also need to give vanilla our change of address, or else they're going to keep referring to the vanilla item table. And this is what repointing is. Repointing is finding every reference to the vanilla item table and changing it to our new item table. And that goes for any general table, any data. It can be for graphical data. It can be anything you want. Repointing is just a general term that's telling vanilla where we put our new stuff. So this is something I've had released for a little while. I've been slowly adding on to it, but I think it's helpful. You can repoint however you like, but this, you can use it as doc. You can just include it. But I've filled all of these in manually. This is references to the most common vanilla data that you might want to repoint. I've commented out the ones that we haven't included yet because Event Assembler would yell at us that those labels don't exist. But for now, we can repoint the item table and these other silly tables that I've included for the sake of showing off. So I've uncommented this. So we are now repointing our table. I haven't changed the table itself, so I don't need to reassemble the CSV. And we see 30 crit rapier. We can even go into a hex editor and confirm this if we want. I can go to any one of these references. The item table is referenced a lot because vanilla is weird, and most of these tables have a function that says get the index of, or get the offset of this index in the item table. And the item table has that too. Vanilla just literally never uses it for some reason. So there's just a ton of references to the item table sitting around, and it's kind of a pain. But you see, like, class table isn't referred to much, character table, all of these are just referred to a few times. But I guess, I don't know, different coders at IS coded things differently, but whatever. You see, this is the current pointer to our item table. This 08B2 is in free space. So we've repointed it. It's good to have an eye out for what's free space and what's not. Like, you can always check. Here's our free space. This is actually like the second thing that's written after a couple text IDs. So yeah, this is pretty early in our free space. We can also repoint the spell association table. Close a couple of these. I'm just going to reveal these repointers. I guess, I'm sorry, I realized I should have probably more closely explained what this is doing. We have our push pop because we're writing to not free space, and every org here contains an offset to a reference to the table. And while normally this would point to the vanilla item table, this points to our new item table. This is a label which is auto-generated in our item table. I'm open to feedback. If I ever gloss over something like that that's not necessarily obvious, please leave it in a comment or let me know or something. I'd be happy to clarify that later in notes or in a comment, or keep an eye out for future videos for that kind of thing. So yeah, nothing's broken. We're repointing our spell association table now. Wait, are we? Wait a second. Hang on. No, we're not. We're not, but that's okay. Because our spell association table, I may have just said item table, I mean spell association table. We still have a label to our spell association table. It's at its vanilla location, so right now we're just basically telling the game, hey, I have a new address for the spell association table. It's where you thought it was before, which causes no harm. It's perfectly okay. But if I wanted to repoint my spell association table, I can do that. And it should automatically update to whatever the free space offset is. And there's not much point in showing that because it won't change anything, but I can show that it won't crash at least. Last time I did this I was using VBA. You should be proud of me, I'm using MGBA now. So yeah, everything should be working properly. I know map animations are something that the spell association table uses, so everything should be fine. So I think that's the last thing I wanted to touch on. Yeah, all of these changes in this Snek file will be pushed to GitHub by the time this video is out. TableManager will be released, and yeah, I suppose that's it. So I'm gonna sign off then. Have fun. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be recording new videos soon that should be shorter than these last few. These have been big ones, but I'm going to be going through common forms of game data that you might want to edit, like characters, classes, and items, anything associated with those, and just show how you want to make common edits. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully there shouldn't be as big a gap as there was between text and this video. But have a nice day. Stay safe. Take a book or a page from Pandan. If you love someone, let them know. Love you, Pandan. See ya.